Whatever happens in the body affects the mind, and whatever happens in the mind affects the body. That is a quote from Desikachar, son of Krishnamacharya. A number of years ago, I began to study the effects of stress disorders and felt compelled to develop and compile tools to help settle the nervous system. So many of our soldiers are returning from war with this disorder, and I hope that we can all get the word out to help those with this condition. Working with students with post-traumatic stress disorder may or may not be in the scope of your practice as a yoga teacher. Please utilize the information here for yourself and when working with students that you perceive would benefit from the practices offered. One can use this information to help bring about a greater sense of well-being for anyone. Topics covered are the definition of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, background information on what happens in the brain when PTSD occurs, and modalities that can be used to help heal from this disorder, including meditative art, guided relaxation, postures, guided breath work, most importantly, your own inner intuition and inner guidance. What is post-traumatic stress disorder? A common definition that you can access for post-traumatic stress disorder is that it is an anxiety disorder that develops after exposure to terrifying events or ordeals in which grave physical harm occurred or was threatened. Family members of victims also can develop the disorder. PTSD can occur in people of any age, including children and adolescents. More than twice as many women as men experience PTSD, and this would be following any exposure to trauma. Depression, alcohol, or other substance abuse or other anxiety disorders frequently co-occur with PTSD. The diagnosis of PTSD requires that one or more symptoms from each of the following categories be present for at least a month, and that symptom or symptoms must seriously interfere with leading a normal life. Reliving the event through upsetting thoughts, nightmares, or flashbacks, or having very strong mental and physical reactions if something reminds the person of the event. Avoiding activities, thoughts, feelings, or conversations that remind the person of the event. Feeling numb to one's surroundings, or being unable to remember details of the event. Having a loss of interest in important activities, feeling all alone, being unable to have normal emotions, or feeling that there is nothing to look forward to in the future may also be experienced. Feeling that one can never relax and must be on guard all the time to protect oneself. Trouble sleeping, feeling irritable, overreacting when startled, angry outbursts, or trouble concentrating. Traumatic events that may trigger post-traumatic stress disorder include violent personal assaults, natural or human-caused disasters, accidents, or military combat. Among those who may experience PTSD are troops who've served in any of the wars, rescue workers working in any aftermath of disasters such as terrorist attack, like we hear daily on the news now. It's becoming a daily event. So not only are the survivors of the event suffering most likely with PTSD, but also the workers who are coming in to deal with the aftermath. And then, of course, the family members of PTSD. And for those of us who are extremely sensitive, of course, we are also experiencing the ripple effects of that just from the nightly news. So how do we address this problem? Many people with PTSD repeatedly re-experience the ordeal in the form of flashbacks. So they have these flashback episodes, memories, nightmares, frightening thoughts, especially when they're exposed to events or objects reminiscent of that trauma. Anniversaries of the event can also trigger these symptoms. People with PTSD also experience emotional numbness and sleep disturbances, depression, anxiety, and irritability, or outbursts of anger. Feelings of intense guilt are also common. Most people with PTSD try to avoid any reminders or thoughts of the ordeal. PTSD is diagnosed when symptoms last more than 1 month. Physical symptoms such as headaches, gastrointestinal distress, immune system problems, dizziness, chest pain, or discomfort in other parts of the body are common in people with PTSD. Often these symptoms may be treated without the recognition that they stem from an anxiety disorder. Treatment may be through cognitive behavioral therapy, group therapy, and or exposure therapy, in which the person gradually and repeatedly relives the frightening experience under controlled conditions to help him or her work through the trauma. Several types of medication, particularly the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs for short, and other antidepressants can also help relieve the symptoms of PTSD. Giving people an opportunity to talk about their experiences very soon after a catastrophic event may reduce some of the symptoms of PTSD. A study of 12,000 school children who lived through a hurricane in Hawaii found that those who got counseling early on were doing much better 2 years later than those who did not. This was information that was compiled from some online sources that have been re-updated over the years, but as all these catastrophic events have begun to occur more and more consecutively, closer in order, I feel as though it's really important to get the information out there that one of the things that we're actually doing with restorative yoga is that we are bringing your nervous system back into a rest and digest mode. So we're taking you out of fight or flight through the practice. You're your own medicine. You're taking yourself out of fight or flight through your practice, bringing yourself back into rest and digest through these ancient techniques that we now call restorative yoga. So let's go into a little bit more deeply about what we're dealing with here. So now that we have some of the details around the disorder, we're going to look at this from a yogic perspective and discover how we can restore this lost sense of comfort and safety. According to Daniel Goleman, a really popular author who authored the book Emotional Intelligence, he said the physiological beginnings of an emotion typically occur before a person is consciously aware of the feeling itself. So Goleman uses the example of a study wherein the individual is quickly shown a photo of a snake. And so the person would actually begin to sweat and to register signs of fear, even though that person has no conscious idea of what they just saw. And they say they have no fear. So cognitively, they say they have no fear. They don't cognitively recognize that they've actually seen an image of a snake. But subconsciously, their body knows they saw the image, and physiologically, just like most of us would do if we saw a snake, we would begin to sweat and our body would register that fear. So let's look at this a little more deeply now. Any emotion can be, and often is, unconscious. So remember that every emotion has a correlating chemical response in the body. So why am I including this information in this section? Since the physical body is constantly asking the question, am I safe? It seems highly likely that as humans, many of us may be relating to the world on a daily basis as though we aren't safe. So we're all operating with some varying degree of what we now know as post-traumatic stress disorder, particularly if one was frightened at a young age. So we're going to talk about how the senses can register noise, movement, and any perceived danger. When we hear a sudden noise, our nervous system, because we are designed to survive, and this is true with any animal with a vertebrae, we will go into what's known as a startle response or a startle reflex. This is just how we're hardwired to get us to safety, to get us out of danger. So a sudden, unexpected noise can put us in the startle response, and it does put us in the startle response. If we see someone else's anger, that can startle us. Traffic alone can do it. And again, the nightly news. So I suggest that we stop watching the news. Okay, so seriously, what do we do about this? All right, so when our nervous system, when we involuntarily contract, when we hear these sudden noises, then we're going to go at a moment's notice into fight or flight. Those are the options for survival. Stand our ground and defend ourselves, or flee. So our system has automatically gone into an alarm system. So our blood pressure will rise. All of our blood will go to our limbs so that we can be moved into safety. And this just happens on autopilot. So the blood supply actually diverts to the limbs. So according to Goleman, if a person was exposed to even mild stress when they were young, those individuals are far more vulnerable to PTSD. So those changes happen in the brain, and then when a secondary thing happens later in life, we're set up for PTSD. So PTSD actually hypersensitizes our amygdala, and it hypersensitizes the amygdala circuitry in the brain. Once the amygdala becomes primed to find danger, and then when life presents that danger once again, that alarm rises to an even higher pitch. So PTSD often leaves the individual with a frozen picture of the event or the events in the amygdala. One way to get rid of a frozen picture in the brain is through art. So coloring mandalas would be a great thing to do, drawing, taking art classes. Our emotional brain is highly attuned to symbolic meaning. So this is a holistic approach to the practice of yoga as a healing art. The act of drawing itself is very therapeutic. Goleman actually goes further, and he cites the work of Dr. Judith Lewis Herman. Herman's 3 steps to recovery from trauma are: number 1, attaining a sense of safety. Number 2, remembering the details of the trauma and mourning the loss that trauma has brought. Number 3, reestablishing a normal life. Steps to recover: find ways to calm the too fearful to allow relearning, meaning help one another understand the symptoms of PTSD. And secondary to this is to help that person who's suffering from PTSD, if you or someone in your life are suffering from PTSD, help that person regain a sense of control over their body and their emotions. A direct unlearning of the lesson of helplessness that the trauma imparted. So the trauma is going to impart a sense of helplessness, and what you want to do is reestablish a sense of empowerment. It's interesting to note that the medications that block the activation of the sympathetic nervous system are commonly prescribed for PTSD. So again, when we have trauma, that's actually putting our nervous system into fight or flight. So, and what that means is we are currently at that point in the sympathetic nervous system. So if we can take practices that are helping to balance our nervous system again, bringing us out of fight or flight, back into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is known as rest and digest, then we are, from within, self-medicating through our chosen practices. Another thing that we can do is we can retell and reconstruct the story in the harbor of safety, according to Dr. Judith Lewis Herman. So we're actually going to be allowing our emotional circuitry to acquire a new understanding of that traumatic memory and the triggers. We can call details and reactions as we go back into the story. I find from a yogic perspective, a wonderful way to stay in the present moment as you're recalling details is to feel the sensations in your body and connect to your present breath moment. So you may be recalling something traumatic, and you're pausing and you're breathing and you're feeling into your current situation at the same time. Current situation meaning feeling deeply into your body and tuning into your breath as you're speaking about this event. And that can be to a trusted friend, anyone that you feel safe talking with. And then finally, you want to mourn the loss that the trauma brought. You've suffered something real. You've been through a traumatic life event. What we don't want to do is shut down emotionally. And the healing process is like if you think of a seed that got planted in the dirt, and then that sprout that's going to come up, it's going to germinate in the soil, and it's going to come up and push out through the roots. In a yogic perspective, we talk about the lotus that blooms up and out through the muddy water. These things that don't kill us will make us stronger. But we have to be willing to go through the mud to push it up and out to get that dirt out of the way. So we want to make sure that we keep our physiological symptoms at a manageable level. We've gotten ourselves to safety, and this is a practice. If it resonates with you, you can keep your physiological symptoms at a manageable level. So we want to be able to bear the feelings and no longer have memories that erupt at uncontrollable times. We want to be able to put them aside like any other memory. And we're rebuilding a new life with strong, trusting relationships and a belief system that finds meaning. Because hope has a lot of healing power in it. If we can find meaning from the trauma, then we have hope. So I would like to finish with just telling one story that I heard Carolyn Mace share. And it was about a man, I believe he was Native American, and he was taken as a prisoner of war. And he was held captive for a long time. And finally, thankfully, he was rescued, he was freed, he was brought back, he was returned home again. But unfortunately, he was suffering with depression. And he actually no longer had the use of his legs. So he's in a wheelchair, and his soul is dying from this being prisoner of war. So his family, his tribe, they took him to a body of water, and they actually lifted out of his chair. And mind you, he couldn't use his legs. And they threw him into the water, and he was drowning. And they told him, they said, "Save yourself." And he went under, and he was sinking. And he thought, they're going to let me drown. And all of a sudden, one of the men who had been one of his most cruel torturers came to him in his mind's eye. He just had a vision of him. And this man would come in every day. And as a prisoner of war, they were starving him to death. He was starving. And this man every day would come in, and he would shove maggots into his mouth. And this man, as he was sinking, and this one of his strongest torturers came into his field of view, and he would come in every day and torture him and shove maggots into his mouth. He stood before him in his mind's eye, and he said, "I know you thought I was being cruel to you, but I knew that if I tried to give you food, that they would kill us both. And the only way I need to keep you alive was to feed you maggots." And at that moment, he was free, and he found his way back to the surface again. And I don't know if the man was really able to walk again or not, but I know that he was able to release a huge amount of forgiveness in that moment, because what he thought was his greatest torturer, this man was actually showing him the only way he could, kindness and love, and he actually was keeping him alive through this perceived torture. So I hope that you'll find that useful. I don't know what your personal trauma is or what you've been through, but I hope that you can take something from that to begin to process your own events. Namaste.